morning. It is Thursday, July the 2nd, and today's quiet time reading is in Mark's Gospel, chapter 6. Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 30 through verse 44, and it's the account of Jesus feeding the 5,000. So let me go ahead and read this passage for us today. Word of God says, "Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, 'Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while.' For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitudes saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. When the day was far spent, his disciples came to him and said, 'This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat.' But he answered and said to them, 'You give them something to eat.' And they said to him, 'Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?' But he said to them, 'How many loaves do you have? Go and see.' And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fishes. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to sit before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men." Now this account has been strongly debated over the years, and most people that are not believers would discount this and say that's impossible, But we know that with God all things are possible. And there's a couple of, I think, really important aspects of this miracle that stand out. One was the first thing we see is the compassion of Jesus. It says when he saw the multitudes that ran on foot, they saw the boat, and he was trying to get away and get his disciples. They'd just been out ministering in the villages and so forth, and healing people and casting out demons. And they come back to Jesus and they give a report of how God has used them in ministry. And so now they're giving their report, but they're tired and they're weary. So Jesus says, we need to get away for a time of rest. And so they get in the boat and they head across the lake there, and the crowds see them and they chase after them to the other side of the lake, out in a deserted place, the Bible says. And there's a throng of people that wait for them, and Jesus sees them. He sees their desire to be near him and follow him, and it says he looks on them and he has compassion, because he sees them like sheep without a shepherd. I wonder how do we see people? I know that in the news we've seen a lot of news coverage over the last few weeks, uh, from Seattle and from Minneapolis and from Atlanta and many other cities around our country, and we've seen protesters, and we've seen all these different kinds of things going on. We've seen those on the left, those on the right. We've seen police officers, and we've seen, you see all these factions, I guess you could say. And it's easy to take sides and point fingers and be angry at this group or that group. But I wonder how many people have looked at these anarchists, the Black Lives Matter groups, um, and just been moved with compassion, because they're like sheep without a shepherd. I look at it, and I see a lot of people who are disillusioned with the government, with society, and buying into a lot of false promises from who I don't really know, to think that by tearing down our society and tearing down our statues, that somehow that's going to make this a better nation, is foolish, in my opinion. But instead of being spiteful and vengeful and wanting to fight back, sometimes it's better to take a step back and try to get to the root of why are people disillusioned? Why are people so upset? Why do people desperately want change? I've often found that hurting people hurt people, and when somebody's hurting, they need compassion. I've said this before, that the problem in our nation is not a skin problem, it's a sin problem. And so instead of looking to this group or that group to try to bring about change or meet people's needs, we need to point people to Jesus. And of course, what does Jesus do next? He meets their need. He meets their need as only He can. He takes what little bit was there available, 5 loaves and a couple little fish, some kid's lunch, and He feeds the multitudes. And the miracle of that is that God is Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. He can provide. But I think the other lesson that you see in this passage of Scripture is in the 12 baskets of leftovers that were taken up. Jesus directed His 12 disciples to go pick up to get the fragments. After everyone had eaten their fill, there were 12 baskets. Now, I don't know if it was a little basket, a great big basket. It doesn't matter. What matters is His disciples, after just going out into the villages and being told not to take any provisions with them, but that God would provide. Now they are holding in their hands a basket full of God's miraculous provision. No explanation, a miracle. And they're holding it in their hands. And, sometimes God demonstrates His power in such a way that there's no doubt as to who to give glory to. But I think it's important to note that it's important that we remind ourselves, that we're reminded constantly of God's ability, God's power, God's faithfulness to meet our needs. I know over the years I've seen God meet my needs. God's been good to me. You know, I've never gone hungry. I've always had a roof over my head. God's met my physical needs, and He's been faithful to take care of me and my family. But it still amazes me how quickly we forget sometimes. You know, I've seen God provide in a miraculous way, and then, you know, within just a short period of time, I get a bill or, you know, something, and I'm like, oh, wringing my hands over how am I gonna pay for this, you know? And it's so easy to forget God that well, God just met your need the other day in a miraculous way. Has God changed? No. Is God still able to meet your need? Well, yes. Then why worry? Because we are forgetful, and we have to sometimes take a step back and just remind ourselves of who God is and what He's able to do. I can imagine those 12 disciples walking around after seeing God multiply those loaves and fishes and feed. You know, it says 5,000 men. Now, I know some people have debated. Well, it specifies 5,000 men. What about women and children? Maybe there were 12,000 people there. I don't know. I know there were at least 5,000. It would make sense to me that there were women and children as well. But it doesn't demean any aspect of the miracle that takes place, whether it's 5,000 or 12,000. So the fact that those disciples picked up 12 baskets full of leftovers, each of them holding testimony in their hand of God's ability to miraculously provide for their physical needs, was something that I'm sure they never forgot that lesson. I pray that if you can recall a time when God's miraculously provided for you, that I pray that's something that you never forget. And you know, looking at the economy and the COVID-19 restrictions and all these things, a lot of people's 401ks have been decimated or whatever. God hasn't changed. He's still able. He's still faithful. And so my encouragement today is know this. God sees you. He has compassion on you. He loves you. And He's able to provide for you. And that's God's word for today. Hope you have a blessed day.